Thanks, everybody, again. I promised to talk a little bit more about some practical applications of well-being during this section, and also to talk a bit about COVID well-being during the COVID era. So I hope you all had a nice break. I saw at least one question in the box, and I'll definitely get to those at the end. One of the things I did in my second book when I explored these 7 domains of well-being was I put them in the sort of a pyramid, and it really wasn't meant to suggest that certain aspects of well-being are more important than others, or that well-being only goes one way. But I think to help support well-being, there is a bit of an order, because I think it's very hard to help give well-being to a stranger. So I put identity and connectedness on the bottom, because just like Eden says in their trainings, getting to know people and having close, continuous relationships really are the foundation to any kind of good support or care. And then when you have those relationships, when there's deep knowing, then you can support security, which is more than just physical safety. It's also emotional, psychological security. So trust, familiarity, dignity, privacy, balance, all those various things. And then when you have that relationship, you also know how to negotiate risk, how to help support more autonomy. And it's only when you can feel safe and have more choice that you can do things that are truly meaningful and truly grow as a person. And joy can stand by itself, or it can be enhanced by all the other domains. So supporting well-being really works 2 ways. To support the well-being of those that we serve helps both of you, because it helps the person, and by helping the person be in a better place, that obviously helps us as well. But also supporting our own well-being is important too, because it not only keeps us healthy and balanced, but also our healthy, balanced approach is good for the other person as well. So as they say on the airlines, always put your own oxygen mask on first. So I'd like to talk about both aspects of well-being, because I think particularly during this pandemic era, we've had a lot of stresses besides just the virus, the emotional stress, the constant bombardment with all the craziness going on in the world. So I think it makes sense to talk about everybody. Well-being is not just for residents. It's not just for people with dementia. It's for all of us. So let's talk about these in order. Let's talk about identity. And I'm just going to give you, as I said before, some examples. This is not exhaustive. I want to just, for those of you who haven't really understood how to or tried applying these in real life and as part of a care plan or part of an approach, I just want to give you a few ideas, and then I invite you all to expand on that. My book, Dementia Beyond Disease, gives lots more ideas. And it also talks about the Eden types of transformation, physical, operational, and personal transformation, to talk about how each of them can support each of these domains of well-being too. But just a few ideas. First of all, for residents, understanding how identity evolves. That identity is not always a static thing. And this is one of those things we have to understand, because we do want to get to know people, but there are parts of us that will stay the same as we age, as we develop a condition like dementia. There are other parts of us that may change over time. We may change our preferences, or maybe our change in abilities will change how we prioritize different things in life. So maybe being on a real strict diet was real important when we were younger, but if we move into long-term care, if we have a condition like dementia, maybe we say, hey, listen, I'm going to eat what I want now. I'm in a different part of my life. And but we still got people who are saying, oh, no, you shouldn't eat that. It's bad for you. You'll gain weight, So we have to understand that identity does evolve. So we need to understand what's important now. Identity is not just who the person was. And so often we focus on reminiscence on people's history, but it's also who the person is and who the person is becoming. We can also understand what are the types of things that create comfort or distress for people. And if people can't tell us, that's a great way to employ family members too, to help fill in some of their experiences. And another great idea for identity is to follow people's rhythms as far as possible. Just to give you a quick example of that, there's a group in Phoenix, Arizona called the Beatitudes Campus. They care for about 40 or so people living with dementia. They have an approach called Comfort Matters, which you may have heard about. Tina Alonso travels and does a lot of speaking about that. They decided years ago that a lot of this late day distress that we are calling sundowning and medicalizing might be due to some other things going on. And I put these things in the realm of identity. First of all, people's personal history might have been triggered by a time of day. So maybe late in the afternoon was when I got ready to leave work, or maybe when I got ready to pick the kids up from school, or maybe when I got ready to make dinner. So when they saw lots of team members leaving and putting coats on and saying goodnight, it would trigger people to say, where should I be going? Do I need to check on my family? Do I need to go somewhere? But the other thing was that they had their schedule. It was a fairly institutional schedule of waking and meals and activities. And they realized that that doesn't always work. I will tell you, when I do those 2-day seminars, Cheryl can probably attest to this, with people without dementia, I make people sundown all the time. Because, what's convenient for me is to meet from 8 to 5 or 8:30 to 4:30. And what's convenient for me is to have people around tables and get you up when I can, but there's a lot of sitting and a lot of talking going on. And what do you think happens to that class about 2 or 3 in the afternoon? People get restless, they start checking their phones, they get up and stretch, they go up and get a cup of coffee. They are not as able to pay attention. It's obvious that people need a break. So it's very hard to adapt to other people's rhythms. And when you live with dementia, even harder. So Beatitudes did 2 simple things. Number 1, no more commotion or visible coming and going at change of shift. Use the back door, don't make a big production out of it. Number 2, a rest as needed policy. Didn't matter whether it was about to be a meal, whether the person was scheduled for an activity, whether you thought they weren't sleeping well enough at night and you didn't want them to nap. People got to, whenever they were getting stressed, whenever they were having trouble managing what was going on around them, they got to lie down, they got to disconnect, they got to rest. And what they found is that they have virtually eliminated sundown syndrome for over 15 years straight now. So once again, we can say it's a symptom of dementia, or we can say it's a symptom of trying to force people with changing brains into abnormal rhythms. For ourselves and our coworkers, one thing to do is to bring all of ourselves to our job. I think that Cheryl mentioned the music background. Probably the most joyous thing I've done this year, besides hanging out with my grandson when I can, is I got to co-write songs for a friend of mine's new record album, which is coming out soon. We're going to the last recording session next weekend to tweak a couple of the tracks, and it'll be out. And it's just been thrilling for me, involving me in a different way. And I used to think that those had to be different, that when I perform music, I couldn't tell people I was a doctor. I wanted them to judge me seriously as a musician. Or that, when I came to work as a doctor, I couldn't really talk about music. But all of who you are is what makes you who you are. And that those different facets can be brought to bear. Your creativity can do so much in your day-to-day job, working with different struggles. There's a wonderful video you may have seen in Eden Training by DeWitt Jones, a photographer, called Everyday Creativity, where he talks about how you can be creative in your daily life. And I see Karen Stobie's on the talk. She's obviously going to be a wonderful addition to the conference. Karen has learned how to bring all of herself to supporting people with dementia, and you'll hear a lot more about that in an amazing way. Another type of identity to help boost your own self-esteem is just to create a workspace that reflects who you are and nurtures your soul. So whatever it is, whether you have a little water fountain in the corner, or whether you put a picture up, or some people, I worked in offices in long-term care without windows for a long time. So putting one of those fake windows on the wall with the scenery, the view of the Canadian Rockies or something, just to give yourself a smile, putting your favorite family member's picture up, whatever makes you feel like this is my space. And sharing your story with others so that people know who you are, what makes you tick, what you believe, and they can understand how you do things the way you do and why you do things the way you do. So just a few examples for identity. Connectedness. For residents, remember that presence is vitally important. It's always about when somebody gets upset, what should we do? What should we have them do? It's often not about doing. As Bill Thomas would say, it's often about being. Presence is important. Touch is important. I know we have COVID. Listen, that's why we have gowns. That's why we have screening. That's why we have gloves. And I'm going to make another comment too, because I know some of the ministry regulations don't allow this, but a coronavirus doesn't know whose hand it's sitting on. It doesn't know whose glove is keeping it away from people. If a properly screened and gowned and masked staff member can hold somebody's hand, a properly screened and gowned and masked family member can hold somebody's hand. You have to go through the due diligence, but there's nothing special about one person. If anything, you might argue a family member might be less likely to be carrying a virus than someone who's working constantly in long-term care. We'll get to that later. Sharpening our communication skills, maybe the most important thing we can do for connectedness, and maybe the most important thing we can do for dementia care in general, if there is such a thing as dementia care. I guess I went against that last talk. Connect to the outdoors, connect to interests, connect to faith, connect to the invisible, if applicable for people. What is your spirituality? How do you connect to the world, both seen and unseen? And find those things that nurture each person's soul through those multiple connections. For yourself, for your coworkers, one of the first people I learned about Eden from, actually the first person I learned about Eden from, was actually not Bill Thomas. He sent one of his educators, Susan Berta, who was a former director of nursing, to come to the first home I worked in to talk about what Eden was. Our social worker invited her to come speak. And I went there trying to figure out how they were going to keep people safe with dogs and cats running around. And I learned from her that there was something totally different about Eden than what I thought it was. And that's when I asked her to connect me to Bill Thomas and met him and went to his training back in the late 90s and really changed my life. But Susan was the first mentor I had. And when I moved over to St. John's to help bring about Eden Alternative Ed in the organization, she was our mentor early on, until I was able to take over that role. And Susan talks about getting rid of the open door policy. Now, what can that possibly mean? Well, Susan was the director of nursing care, and she said in her home where she worked, she had an open door policy. And what that meant was her door was always open. She would often work in her office on things that were important to her. And if you had a concern or a question and you wanted to inconvenience yourself and come to her, you could come down and knock on her door. And she'd ask you what you need. You might occasionally get the look that sort of says, I'm busy, what's going on? But she realized that that's not really supporting her team the way she needs to. And she said, what we need to do is we need to close that open door, but make sure that we're standing on the outside, not the inside when we close it. Get to the community. Don't just go when there's a problem or a challenge. Check on people. Make daily connections. Don't be inaccessible. Don't make people come to you to find out what they need. Creating a meaningful home and community engagement is part of connectedness too. So making sure that people are connected to meaning wherever they live, making sure that people continue to connect to the community. So the community may be where people live, and it may be the larger community beyond an individual neighborhood. But what are the important connections people have? Maybe to their faith traditions in the community, maybe to friends and neighbors, maybe the favorite activities. What are the things that are outside the home that we can connect people to as well? And get outdoors. How can we connect ourselves to that? Our community engagement, once again, I remember a PSW that worked with me at St. John's, who used to sing in the choir and was a churchgoer, and there was very strong Christian faith for her. And she worked with people with very advanced dementia, but she would sit with them sometimes and sing hymns and spirituals with them. And really people would be mesmerized. And this wasn't in her PSW job role. And yet she was using all of herself, engaging her community and bringing meaning into the home. But I think getting outdoors is good for all of us. Now, the latest trend is walking meetings instead of sitting in the meeting room. And especially now with COVID, going for a walk in the park, in the woods, people tend to be more creative. They tend to be outside the box in their thinking when they can connect with nature. It's good for all of us. I want to just settle on communication for a moment because I think this is so important. And Karen may talk about this too. Karen's a real expert in this, as is Cheryl, of course. But just a few of my tips to remind you, we hear all these things, but we get stuck in our multitasking and our jobs to do, and we forget these things. Remember, presence is important. Go up to a person with the mindset that everything else is out of your mind. And right now I'm focused on you and what we are going to engage in together. People living with dementia who have trouble communicating can sense when your mind is not there. And that can be enough to make people shut down if they know that you're not really there with them presently. Get down to eye level. 3 good reasons for that. Number 1, it facilitates communication. Seeing, hearing, looking at facial expressions, looking at lips moving, facilitates communication. Secondly, it takes away the power dynamic that puts me over you because I'm standing above you, which for people for whom security and autonomy are issues, can often lead to a negative reaction, as any of us might if we feel controlled or feel unsafe. Thirdly, the unspoken message when you sit down that I have time for you, that I'm not standing there about to run out the door. And once again, that gives me a sense that I can think carefully, I can have time to process, and I can best express myself. It should go without saying that a person who needs glasses to see you should have them on and clean. A person who needs a hearing aid to hear you should have it on and the TV turned off. And yet, over and over again, these things don't happen with every interaction. Think about our body language. Think about our facial expression, tone. Remember, the majority of the message we give in a conversation comes from the nonverbal cues, the vast majority. Make sure that our sick child at home or that difficult situation we were just in is not being carried into the room with us in our body language, because that will speak louder than our words. And the person may react, even though we say the right things, because they might think, why doesn't she like me? What is she upset about? She's angry. She's being mean to me, because they see the body language. They don't hear the words. One thing people living with dementia do better than us is to be in the moment and to focus on nonverbal communication, because sometimes that's what they have best to understand the world around them. Pacing, choice of words, emphasis can help people to better understand what might otherwise just sound like a run-on sentence of gobbledygook if we just say it quickly and don't take the time to sort of modulate our wording and our speech a little bit more carefully. Not like somebody's child, not like somebody's dumb, but just a slight slow down, a slight enunciation, a slight emphasis on the important words in the sentence. I have a technique I talk about, which is speaking like a sports interviewer. I've always laughed at sports interviewers because they never ask questions to people. You know, if the Oilers lose a hockey game, you know, the interviewer might come up to the coach and say, well, you had a little rally there in the third period, but the team just fell a bit short, and then hold the mic out. And I always just say, well, why did he do that? He didn't ask him anything. But athletes and coaches know how to respond to those kinds of conversations. And I thought later, that's a great way to talk to someone who's forgetful, because we often speak to each other in questions. What did you do this weekend? I hear you went to that new restaurant. How was it? What did you eat? But when you are forgetful, asking lots of questions forces you to perform, to come up with information that could be right or wrong. It's embarrassing. It can be infuriating or frustrating sometimes. So try to take all those questions you want to ask and rephrase them as statements. Instead of saying, what did you have for lunch today? Say, I hear they had lasagna today for lunch. That must have been good. Then the person can say, yes, it was delicious. I had 2 portions. They can say, no, I didn't. I had a chicken sandwich. They can say, I like lasagna. They can say, we used to make sauce at my house on Sundays. They can say whatever they want because they set the level of detail and they don't have to be right or wrong. And when you do ask a question, make it an opinion question. So if someone says, I want to go home, instead of saying, where did you live? Facts, right, wrong. Say, tell me about your home. What did you like best about your home? What's your favorite place? Because once again, that's never right or wrong. My opinion is always right. It's easier for me to answer those if I can't remember things. And Ann Basing talks about beautiful questions. Get beyond the facts, get to the feeling of things. So she might ask, what's your favorite sound of water? People might talk about rain. People might talk about the sound of the ocean waves. People might talk about rippling in a stream. They might talk about the tea kettle boiling, whatever. Anne has a wonderful book out called Creative Care that just came out, which I would highly recommend, by the way. And then listening and understanding is the other half, that mindfulness, that presence, that non-judgmental attitude, and looking for the fact that people move from fact-based speech to speech that's based in emotions, the feelings that are more durable than the facts, or the symbolism that comes from the words they choose or what they express. And work on those emotions. Connect there first with validation. Don't try to argue people. Don't try to redirect people. Don't try to explain things away. Just connect with the feeling, because that's what they're talking about. Don't worry about the facts if they're right or wrong in your world. They're expressing a feeling more than a fact. And that's where we need to stick with people and speak to those underlying feelings and explore them with a person as they're able to, with those kinds of conversation tips, and avoid the 4 traps: reorientation, redirection, distraction, and deception. None of those understand the deeper emotions being felt. None of them understand the deeper well-being need. What they are staff-centered solutions that try to get the person to a place where we can get back to our tasks, but they never solve it. They may calm the person for a moment, but you know those questions come back. that distress comes back again and again because we haven't gone deep enough. And look at those well-being domains as a possible source for what the person is saying behind that emotion that you're feeling. And here's an important point about these two slides: communication tips, listening and understanding. Even if you forget everything else I've said today and just do the two things on those slides with every encounter, you will see a major difference in the people you care for without doing anything else. I personally believe, I haven't found a way to prove this yet, although some people like Angela and my friend Daniela Greenwood, who's got a world-class consistent assignment model, are helping me prove it. I believe that if we had consistent, permanent assignments and we use those techniques with every encounter, I believe 70% of all the stress we see would go away without doing anything else. It's that important. So try it, see what you think. Security. Well, one thing you can do is you can audit the environment for stressors, or triggers. And I have something to tell you about. And this also gets a little bit to the question that Morgan asked during the break, which I will address in more detail during the live Q&A, about people that are calling out, that are making verbalizations all the time, that seem distressed. There are many things I'll get to, but one thing is that there are aspects of the environment that stress people that we often don't see because we're working there. We're filtering things out. Some of it's sound, some of it's lighting, some of it's commotion. We don't often see that. And one of the things I've done at the Research Institute, which I'm just completing now, is I worked with a practicum student and we developed an environmental guide. Now, there's lots of environmental guides out there about physical design and all that, but we went a little farther. We do the usual bits about lighting and sound and color and contrast and all that, but we also talk about well-being. We talk about operational factors within the space. We talk about relational factors within the space. And we talk about sensory changes. And so this is a hands-on guide that is not for architects or planners. It's for the team, for the nurses, for the PSWs, for the other people that work with the residents and the residents, to go around and audit their environment and find the things that are helping create a sense of comfort and belonging for the person and those that aren't. And we're putting the reformatting on it now I did some evaluations up at Schlegel last time I was allowed in Canada back in early March, and we're writing it up, and it will be available through the RIA. So keep an eye out on the-ria.ca. And hopefully one of these days, in the next month or two, that will be a resource you can also use. Be proactive. Think about triggers. Sometimes people say, well, he's already out of control and there's nothing I can do to calm him. Go back, walk back through time. It didn't just come out of nowhere. You can almost always, if you're careful, go back several hours. You can see a succession of things that led up to where the person is today. Body language, once again, so important. Spiritual meditative practices can be very important. And sometimes when people can't even talk, just having them in a room where maybe their faith tradition is being shared through music, through prayer, whatever, sometimes just sitting in a chapel or a religious space can bring people to a place. For ourselves, for our coworkers, the same thing, spiritual and meditative practices as they're useful for us. Work to maintain our physical health. It's hard to be secure when you're struggling with physical illness. So try to stay as healthy as we can. Take care of ourselves, put the oxygen mask on first. Same thing with finances. Review and get help when you need it. There's a lot of strain going on right now in this environment these days. Get help. Don't feel you have to do it alone. And solicit support from your coworkers and professionals. When you have a day, when you know if you go into Mrs. Jones' room, you are in a mood that you're going to make things worse instead of better, ask one of your coworkers to do it for you and then pay them back when they have a bad day. I remember Bill Thomas at the first Eden conference saying, beware of the Eden superhero. Nobody is without vulnerability. Nobody can do this by themselves. Have the sense of being humble enough to know when you need other people's help. Autonomy. A great way to support autonomy, once again, is communication skills. When we take the time to communicate carefully with people, we empower them to be understood and to understand us. When we don't take the time, we disempower them. Even when people can't do a lot, seek input and direction at all times. Say, what do you think? Is this okay? Is the water warm enough? Are you comfortable? What would you like to do first? Would you like to hold the washcloth? Would you like me to help you with that? There's so many ways we can constantly check in. Daniela calls it continual consent through any kind of activity. And understand that when people do things, Those aren't behaviors. Those are often nonverbal expressions of choice or preference. And understand, what is this person teaching me about the approach right now? How can I do it differently? For ourselves, for coworkers, arrange anything you're able to fit your rhythms and preferences. I know you can't always make the day you want it to go. Control what you can. Understand what you can and can't control. Control what you can to the best of your ability, and empower and support those who report to you, because the better we are at doing that, and Eden teaches about how to empower people. I won't go into that, but take some things off your plate. People are capable. People need to be part of the solution. Don't feel, once again, you have to do it all yourself. And sometimes when there are things you're not very good at, you can kind of shuffle them off on somebody who's better at them, and you can take on things that maybe they struggle with. I remember when I worked at St. John's, I was the assistant medical director, and there were 4 doctors and a couple of nurse practitioners. The medical director was great at doing administrative things, policies and procedures, stuff like that. I was much better at the kind of interpersonal stuff. So we kind of, when jobs came up, we kind of split them to our strengths. Find people you can share strengths with and share weaknesses with. I, by the other hand, was terrible at the administrative stuff. Meaning, for residents, find ways for the person to be meaningfully involved in the daily life of home and community. Solicit frequent input and opinions, once again, and make it meaningful. Don't give people activities where they can feel useful. Give people activities where they can be useful. And that can be a struggle sometimes with advanced disability, but you can almost always find something. Another way to improve meaning is through rituals. We talk about that in Eden. Celebrate old rituals and or create new ones in your new living environment with your new family, as it were. For ourselves, for our coworkers, think about our many accomplishments. Give ourselves a pat on the back. We're always talking about quality improvement. Quality improvement's great, but it kind of puts us in this perfectionist mindset of we got to do better, we got to do better. Sure we do, but we've also done a lot of great things. We need to stop and think about that. Try to find those things that are meaningless or soul-killing that are in your day. And once again, if you don't have to do them, stop doing them. Don't do them to please other people. Sometimes it's tough to say no. Sometimes it's tough to delegate. Do it for your own well-being. And share the knowledge and skills you've gained, and not just in your organization, but beyond, with the community, with your family. Reflect on the great meaning that your work has brought to your life and those around you. Growth. Believe it or not, people in long-term care can grow. Believe it or not, people with dementia can grow. Start by introducing new experiences. It doesn't have to always be about structure and routine. And it's interesting how well-being comes in. I remember way back in my pilot, someone asking me, well, some people with dementia like structure. They like predictability. But Eden says we need spontaneity and variety. So how do we know which is better? Well, I think about the domain of security. If someone's in a place where their sense of security is high, then I would say that's a good place for variety and spontaneity. If they're in a place where their feelings of security or safety are challenged, that's not the place for surprises. So if someone's naked in the shower, not the place for variety and spontaneity. But if somebody's relaxed and a child runs in and creates a commotion, it could be a very pleasant experience. But introduce new experiences and let the person guide you as to when they're in a good place to try something new. Don't expect that people can't try new things. And often growth, growth was the second domain in the original white paper, and I said I reordered it. I just thought it was too hard for most people to see growth so early on in the education process. But one way that you can visualize growth, even in a person with advanced dementia, is to strengthen the first 5 well-being domains, and then you will see it happen. When you improve those 5 domains, you will see people grow without doing anything extra specific. And then use things like arts, music, etc., to engage people beyond memory, beyond those traditional cognitive skills that we measure and that we care plan around. For ourselves, engage our curiosity for the larger world. What can we do outside work that's not just work? How can we grow as people? Try new approaches and routines. Maybe it's just driving a different way to work, taking a different route on the bus, or however you get there. Maybe it's just doing something different at home in your community. And once again, reflect on all you've learned. I've used in my books a lot of narratives by people living with dementia, and I've used some narratives, books written by people who were care partners of family members with dementia. And one of the threads that's so strong is the personal growth of the family member during the time that they support somebody living with dementia. Joy. For residents, touch, sit, be, stimulate the five senses in all the different ways we can. Learn to laugh. It's okay to have fun at work. It's okay to have fun with residents. It's just not at people's expense. And for ourselves and co-workers, it can be really helpful to make a gratitude list to engage ourselves with arts, music, dance, comedy. Thank you, Karen Stobie, for bringing improv into our lives and reminding us how important it is for all of us to improvise a little bit. And give yourself some me days. Don't be afraid to take care of yourself, to pay yourself first sometimes. The budget will come due and you'll find what you need to pay the bills. But pay yourself in well-being first off. So quickly, to finish up, care in the COVID era. I'm going to use this saying. I don't know if Alphonse Carr said it, but that's what Google tells me. The more things change, the more they stay the same. That's what I've learned. I've done nothing more these past 7 months than been asked to talk about COVID and people with dementia and COVID in long-term care. Here's what I've learned, mainly from two organizations. First of all, Schlegel Villages. I worked with their personal expressions resource team at a big retreat. And they said several of their neighborhoods with people living with dementia, they found during the pandemic, people were calmer than they had been before the pandemic. And we thought, well, that's different. Let's explain why you think that's happening. And they came up with 7 factors they thought were important. First of all, they were cohorting staff. And so they were still doing a lot of rotating there, but now they had consistent staff assignments. So they were getting to know the residents better. They were getting to know them beyond words to understand their individual needs, preferences, rhythms. And because they weren't rotating, they were also working better with consistent relationships with their peers. They were following resident rhythms better. And because you couldn't do large group stuff, there were fewer scheduled routines. They were actually able to go with individual rhythms of waking, sleeping, meals, activity. There was decreased visitation. Now, not that visitation's bad. We don't want people isolated. But a lot of times visitation comes with commotion, comes with strangers that people don't recognize, and casual pass-throughs by other staff who are walking through but don't belong there that may upset people. There were fewer large group activities, which a lot of people can't attend with. A lot less of that parking people in front of the television, which nobody seems to want to watch. And there was increased spacing for meals. People weren't crowded together in one large, noisy room for 30 people. So the lessons I got from that, consistent assignments, that's number 1, 2, 3 on my list. I can't say it enough. Daniela has convinced me. I used to think that after we did Eden for a while, we'd work on consistent assignments. Danielle agreeing with this convinced me that this is one of the first steps we should do, because every Eden initiative you want to bring about, when you're constantly moving staff, how can they attend to a new way of doing things when they're constantly shifting their assignments, shifting their work, shifting their routines? How can they focus on anything new? Not to mention the benefit of caring for people consistently. Better individualization of rhythms and routines, more small group and personalized engagement, less of the big drive-by activities, decreasing extraneous noise and commotion. So now with visitation, we're starting to space out visitors, which is not a bad practice all the time, perhaps. And don't enter living areas if you don't have a meaningful role there. The second is the greenhouse project, where I'm very involved in the United States, a small house model with 10 to 12 people in each house. There are nearly 300 greenhouses that were studied, are in an ongoing study during COVID with the University of North Carolina and Cheryl Zimmerman. And I can tell you what's happened up to this point. As of the end of August, greenhouse resident COVID infection rate was 20% of our national long-term care average infection rate, and their death rate, 4%. People in other nursing homes have 25 times as many deaths as they do in greenhouses. These are small homes, very relationship-rich homes, communal dining, lots of high-touch social relational environments. And they are mostly high-acuity long-term care houses. They're licensed as long-term care. The ones we helped develop at St. John's, the acuity level is actually higher than in the main campus, and they almost all integrate people with and without dementia. So how did they get away with so few infections and so few deaths? Here are some of the probable factors. Small households, 10 to 12 residents per household, not 30 or 40. Consistency of staff assignments. They almost all have consistent staff assignments. They're not rotating people, and they very rarely have agency staff coming in. Private rooms. Everybody gets a private room with an ensuite shower. There's no doubles. There's no multiple rooms. We did a study at the RIA about factors leading to COVID deaths in Ontario nursing homes, And the most powerful predictor of COVID infection and death was the old pre-1972 multi-bedded rooms. Profit or not profit wasn't the issue. Staffing wasn't the issue. It was multiple bedrooms was the highest risk of many. Easy access to the outdoors. Direct access is a requirement of the greenhouse project. Versatile staff. So there are fewer ancillary staff because those PSWs, who are now called Shabazim, are cooking. They're sharing meals with the residents. They are doing basic activities in housekeeping and planning the day with the residents, and the others, nurses, therapists, environmental services, catering, etc., just come in as supportive workers but are not there every day. Better personalization of individual rhythms. No one has ever woken up in a greenhouse, and no one ever should be woken up. That's a basic right. Activities, knowing when a person needs to get outside and walk, knowing when a person likes to eat their meals, knowing what a person might want to do at 2 a.m. and being able to do that because we know that person well. The physical separation of the households is now this cutting through and commotion because these are separate rooms. And like at Sherbrooke, they have a door, they have a front door, they have a porch. You don't just walk through them. And the open floor plan that they have allows for spacing. So you can have a meal. You can have 3 or 4 people at the large table, spaced 6 feet apart. You can have some people in the living room using tray tables. You can have people at the bar bench, wheelchair height bench that's adjoining the open accessible kitchen. So you can still get people together and have maintained spacing. So the more things change, maybe the more they stay the same. We already know a lot about how to keep people safe and better support people with dementia. And remember, infection control and culture change are not mutually exclusive. Relationships are infection control. Culture change is infection control. Well-being is infection control. So number 1, consistent assignments. Number 2, private rooms. And I wrote back in my book, Dementia Beyond Disease, that I didn't believe anybody should do any new building or renovation unless every single room they build is private. Small households with open areas, central open areas. Follow elders' rhythms. More individualized small group engagement. Access to the outdoors. It's another space where you can be distanced from people and stretch your legs and get out of your tiny room but not infect anybody. So what are our steps? First of all, infection protection is always important. Please, please, please get your flu shots because it's going to get worse. This is the pessimistic part, okay? In the Northern Hemisphere where you and I live, we've had a tough 6 months. And I can guarantee you, at least in the US, with no coherent leadership, it's going to get worse because we're going to have darkness, we're going to have cold, and we're going to have flu and colds on top of what we've had. So we have to prepare ourselves. So get our flu shots. Don't spread infections around. Remember, even if you don't get COVID, if you get the flu, you're going to have to be screened. You're going to have to quarantine. You're going to have to do all those things until you know for sure that's not COVID. It's just going to increase things. So get the shots. Let's get some herd immunity going. Continue all the infection control guidelines as before. Review people's med lists. Is everything necessary? Remember that sedating medications make COVID more dangerous because when you're infected, you have high fevers, which antipsychotics can increase. You can fall. You can be confused. You can be lethargic, not eat or drink enough. Also think about those proton pump inhibitors, the Prilosec, the Nexiums, the Previcids. They decrease stomach acid to the extent that they may increase mortality. And a lot of people just get put on them as a matter of course when they go to the hospital and end up in long-term care on these pills forever. Make sure pills need to be taken. Don't give people things they don't need. Cohort, I'm still, this is really kind of sacrilegious. I'm not convinced that cohorting people with dementia is the answer because in most greenhouses don't do that. I think what we need to do is cohort the care staff. No case of COVID ever developed new in a long-term care home. It was always brought in from the outside. And there's a lot of evidence that people that rotate around, that go from community to community, are big vectors of disease. And limit that cross-visitation of other professionals. And as the Canadian Commission has suggested, find full-time employment for people so they don't have to work jobs at 3 different organizations to get their 40 hours per week. Step 2, maintain engagement and well-being. The best answers are found in close, continuous relationships. Find out what's meaningful for each person. I hope my thunderstorm isn't bothering anybody at the other end of this. Creatively address those needs. Use the science to guide engagement. Keep people moving indoors and outdoors as safely as possible. Touch, but do it safely. And negotiate upside and downside risk. More on that in 1 second. There's a group called Mercy Health in Australia that actually did not restrict visitation during the pandemic up to this point, even during the lockdowns. I know if you have a huge outbreak like they've had in some places in Ontario, you might need to have temporary lockdowns. But basically, they kept people to the same standards. They had training for visitors, both online and on site. And those visitors' family members had to demonstrate competencies with infection control precautions. They were screened for COVID, just as the staff were. And they added things like external tea rooms for visits. And at the greenhouse, where I've just helped my mother move in a few weeks ago in Rochester at St. John's, right now what they're doing in their semi-quarantine is when we've been tested, we can take her to the front porch, the side porch, the gazebo out in the garden, or the den. And so they're coming up with ways this can be done safely. The dementia conundrum, consistent staffing is the key. Work on well-being and meaningful engagement. Reorientation and redirection do not work. And remember, there is no pill that will help a forgetful person remember that they need to wear a mask, wash their hands, walk here, don't walk there, or stay 6 feet away. All you do is sedate people. There is no defense for giving a sedating medication to somebody who cannot maintain guidelines. You're only going to increase the risk of death, and that's a dangerous thing to do. There are other solutions, and we got lots of creative people, and we can talk about that in the discussion. Help people move around. Don't make them sit in the room for 14 days. I couldn't sit here for 14 days. Why should they? Give them cueing, give them walking, free up a team member to walk with somebody, take them outdoors, cue them about not touching this or that, not going here or there, washing hands as an activity together. Or if you got 3 people that want to do it, then instead of man on man, you can do zone defense and you can cue a couple people at once. Be creative. And you know more about this as people that do this every day than I do. And engage families safely. It doesn't mean it's going to be the same for every family member. Fair is not equal. So we have to come up with what people need and what's the best way to do it. And for everything else in between, know each person's priorities and risk tolerance. Don't go with all or none thinking. The problem with policies around COVID or anything else is they tend to be black and white. But choice and abilities are always along a spectrum. There's nuance to everything, and we have to individualize. We can't just say everybody can go out, nobody can go out. We have to use nuance and use that individual knowledge to come up with an individualized plan. Remember, there's upside and downside. There's a risk things could go wrong. There's also a risk things could turn out better. So never ask, what's the risk of doing something without also asking, what's the risk of not doing this? If you put somebody in the room for 14 days, you will have deconditioning. You will have isolation. You'll have depression, a higher risk of falls, maybe decreased breathing, making it harder to clear a lung infection. There's always risk. Don't eliminate it, negotiate it. One caveat, revise if one's choices directly affect the health of others. Let me just pull an example out of the air. If you're somebody, for instance, who was in the hospital with COVID and you wanted to go outside and have some people drive you around in an SUV so you could wave to your supporters and put them at risk, that to me is irresponsible. Okay, so there are some limits to individual choice, in my opinion. And the long-term response beyond COVID, permanent consistent staffing models, private rooms, smaller households, full-time positions, equitable pay and benefits, and regulatory reimbursement reform. Simple. We can do that tomorrow, right? So thanks very much. I'm going to finish up because I want to have time for discussion if we do. Thanks, everybody, for being part of this, and I wish you the best of luck. Yeah, okay. So Morgan asked about somebody who has always got repetitive verbalizing, sometimes even physical outbursts, and how we can support people. And it can be distressing to others without using antipsychotics. First of all, once again, the mindset. Realize that the antipsychotic is not telling the person, be quieter. The antipsychotic is achieving that through sedation. And it has been proven, conclusively proven, that if you put somebody with dementia on antipsychotic, you're increasing the risk of dying, you're increasing the risk of a stroke, you're increasing the risk of falls, and you will speed up their cognitive decline compared to somebody who's not taking one. And many other side effects, movement disorders, constipation, you name it. So once again, understand that all you're doing is sedating people. You're not meeting their needs. You're not really helping anybody. And it's rare that I've found somebody who is making verbalizations who you can actually make quiet with a drug without snowing them to the point where they're dangerously ill. So we have to avoid that. Oh my God, I think God is telling me to put an earbud on. I'm not sure. Let's see if this is better. I don't know if is that coming through at all, or is it not bothering you?
A little bit, yes.
Let me see if I can get my Bluetooth going while I continue to answer this.
If you don't ask, we'll understand.
Am I connected? I have no idea. I bought new AirPods, and I think this is still the old ones. Let me put the new one on. Anyway, I'll do my best. Who would expect a thunderstorm in mid-October?
Really?
Okay, now,
Power.
can you hear me through my... I think I'm on it.
Yeah,
I'm
we
not.
can hear you.
Okay, well, let's just go with it and see what happens. I'm wearing it. It may or may not be working. So there are several things. First of all, in a case like this, you always need to make sure the person's not in pain. I don't think it's a UTI because you don't, verbalize for 6 months on end because you have a UTI. I don't think we need to send urines on everybody like this. But make sure people aren't in pain because there are different ways to express pain. And sometimes even just an empirical trial of Tylenol 3-4 times a day for a couple of weeks to see if it changes. And you have this wonderful PAINAD scale, PAINAD scale, which is a simple observational scale for people with Alzheimer's that can tell us if what they're expressing is possibly showing pain or not. So you can identify whether a trial of something like Tylenol or something else is actually helping or not. Beyond that, I would say trust in well-being. Try the well-being approach. Even when the person can't talk to you, even when you don't know the person well, try that exercise. And I went through it quickly. It is described in detail in Chapter 10 of Dementia Beyond Disease. And I saw Karen's note that you have that in your at Connecting Care. So it's available to you for free. And so try it. Sometimes it's amazing how much a lack of well-being was behind that. And the other thing I would suggest is, once again, wait for this environmental audit that we came out with and audit the environment through the eyes of the person. What is the soundscape like around that person? What's happening? I remember a story of a guy with Lewy body dementia who was in the Midwest, and he would all of a sudden just start yelling, stop it, make it stop. And people thought because he had Lewy body dementia that he was hallucinating, and they were going to give him drugs for this. And a nurse who couldn't understand because he was alone sometimes, there was no TV going, he said, well, I'm just gonna put myself in this person's place and see what they're experiencing. And he sat down and cleared his mind and just sat next to the person quietly for 15 or 20 minutes. And what he discovered in taking that place was, oh, for God's sakes, now I got Siri asking me what I want. Okay, new computer. It's just too good for me. What he discovered was that it had been windy out that week, and that there was a window that was open a crack. And every time the wind increased, there was a very soft whistling through the crack he never noticed before. And every time the whistling went out, the guy started yelling. And so he went over and shut the window, and the guy's verbalizations went away. So being attentive to the environment can be really important too. Think about things, think about what that person's expressing. And really look at it through those domains of well-being. You might be surprised at what you find. Try the well-being approach, which is outlined, and see what happens. It's not necessarily an inevitable consequence of dementia the person's going to verbalize. Now, there's not always a concrete reason. It might not always be because I have to go to the bathroom, or because I'm in pain, or because I'm hungry. You may never find it, but it's amazing how sometimes the well-being approach works even when you don't discover what worked. You just fill those glasses and you put the person in a better place. So try it. I don't have an answer for every individual, but you might be surprised at what you learn when you do that. Other questions? Thanks for that. Looks like there may be another one. There's a lady in a memory care cottage screaming all day long. Try all types of diversions. Once again, diversions don't work. Try well-being. Same thing. Try well-being because diversion is something you think might help them. But that doesn't look at the world through their eyes. It doesn't understand what their feelings of security are at this point in time, what their feelings of meaning are, what their feelings of autonomy are. Start filling those glasses. Start being careful with every interaction. The other thing I suggest to people is that, and this kind of comes with autonomy and connectedness, is to always connect before anything. And think about this. In long-term care, whether you're a nurse, a PSW, a social worker, a rec therapist, a doctor, how often do you walk up to a resident when you don't have something you want them to do? Time to get up, time to get washed, time to have a meal. And you can be nice, you can be cordial, you can invite people, but the unspoken message is you have no control. We're telling you what's going to happen next. So I always recommend with people that when you go to somebody, you always knock on the door, you always identify yourself, ask permission to enter, give them control over their space. come in, sit down, connect with them, ask how they're doing. And when you come in, don't say, I've got your pill. Don't say, I'd like to help you with a bath. No task. Just come up and say, can I visit for a moment? And if you get permission, go in and sit down and visit for a moment. And then say, boy, we got some breakfast cooking. Would you like something to eat? Don't make the task the reason for the visit, because that's not a close, continuous relationship. That's what are you going to do for me today? And if you had a coworker that only came up to you when she needed you to do her a favor, what would you think of that person? So once again, thinking about how we interact with people can be really, really important, because sometimes that yelling is just, I can't take this place where I don't have any control over my environment. So once again, use well-being, use this environmental audit when it comes out. I wish I could hand it to you today, but we're making it more readable and more usable. We're breaking it up into laminated sections so you can do, it's a big thing with lots of different aspects. So the team can take one part in the huddle or team meeting and look at one aspect at different times. So we're working on that. So that's kind of my quick thing. Peter says his background's in developmental disabilities. It's amazing everything you talked about can be carried over. Yeah, that's why I love the idea of seeing dementia as a disability, because you don't talk about how to make the person fit our needs. They need to be quiet. They need to be awake at this time. They need to be in an activity. It's how do we accommodate to their needs, their view of the world. That the definition I shared about the person's experience changing, my experiential definition, that really helped me get into the disability mindset. It also helps something else I want to say quickly, which is very subversive, but very powerful. And that is when you define dementia as brain disease, there's nothing more complex in the universe than the human brain, trillions of connections. And it's hard for any of us to understand that. Probably the people that have the best hold on that are neuroscientists, and for doctors, neurologists, psychiatrists. So when someone's fighting during a shower, someone's calling out, who do you go to? You go to the neurologist, you go to the psychiatrist, you go to the geriatricians. But guess what? In medical school, I never had a class on how to help a person with dementia with a shower. I know how to give pills, so the neurologist. You call somebody up and say, someone's fighting me during the shower, guess what you're going to get? Because when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. When you define dementia instead as a shift in the way a person experiences the world, now who are the experts? The person with dementia and the person closest to them. We're feeding into principle 8 of Eden. So now we don't go to the doctors to solve our problems with showers. We talk to the team. We talk to the person with dementia. We talk to family members. We find out what works among the real experts. And we don't bring the doctors into this. I feel that the most important people here are not the doctors. Doctors respond to the phone calls they get. If I can stop you making the phone calls to doctors, you won't get pills. And every time I see a place with 0 antipsychotics and I say, how'd you get the doctors on board? They say, they pretty much follow our lead. If we're calling them saying we got a problem, they'll give us a pill. But if we don't call them and they just come in for routine rounds, they're not going to say, who can I give an antipsychotic to today? They're responding to our distress, our request for their help. When we find solutions, doctors always support us. So remember, it's not just about changing doctors. It's about changing all of us and changing our landscape of what we think the solutions might be.
Thank you so much, Dr. Power. Very much appreciate your presentation. And we're recording all of these presentations, and I have no doubt that yours is going to be watched over and over and over. So thank you so much.
I appreciate it. I know I didn't give you all the answers you need for those questions because they are very much about the individual. And you know, if I just quickly say, when I come in and do consultations, I never walk in and solve any of the challenges you have because I don't know the people. What I try to do is give you a framework and a way of thinking, and then you who know the person well are usually the ones who find the answers. And that's the best I can do, is to give you ways of thinking.
Thank you. It's great advice.
Thank you all. And enjoy this conference. It looks like a wonderful event.
Thank you.